we're going to be assembling a Supreme hog feeder. Now, this hog feeder will all the time come assembled here on the base, but the part we are interested in is the hopper or the tapered piece that comes off of it. We're going to be offering it in two selections. One where it comes in this configuration with the hopper sections being loose, and that's what we're going to go through today, is assembling these. And the other option is coming from the factory with the hopper installed. Okay, so when we're assembling this, there's going to be three different types of hardware. You're going to have your 1/4 inch self tappers. You're going to have your longer thread formers that do not have a gasket on them. And the last one you're going to have is a gasketed thread forming bolt. So when we assemble these, what we're going to do here is you start off with a single panel, and the panels are always going to be on the outside of this ring. So you're going to see two holes here, or excuse me, three holes that these bases correspond to, with reliefs cut in them for the existing bolts and nuts that are already on the piece. So the first thing we do is we take our self-tapper. That's the first piece of hardware that we use. We're going to start off with a sheet placed on the outside, and we're just going to get that started by hand here on the end. Kelly, do you want to grab me the gun maybe here? And with that started on the end, you're going to take an impact driver if you have one, and you want a 3/8 nut driver on the end, preferably with an extension, and you're going to get that just started on there. Then the next piece of hardware you're going to is the thread forming longer bolt. That one is going to go in to the middle, and you want to make sure that while you're doing this, you are leaving all of these sections at least a little bit loose. You do not want to tighten them the entire way. And it's probably best to have a second set of hands available to hold sheets like Kelly's doing for me right now. Okay, so again, I'm leaving that loose, but started in there. Once you've got your first piece set with your self tapper there on the first hole and your longer thread former on the second, when you come to the third one, this hole is going to be shared, this hole is going to be shared by two of these hopper sheets. Again, starting with a self tapper. Now, if you look at the end of these pieces, you're going to notice that there's a slight taper to this. This is the inside in reference to these two, and it's going to be the same. Every single one on the left-hand side is going to have a slight taper on the inside. Your first hole is going to share the hole on this ring with your first sheet that you put in, and you're going to follow the same process. You're going to use a self-tapper on the first one, right there. Then you're going to go to a thread former, and you're just going to alternate back and forth. So that slight taper, you want that to sit, when we say inside, we reference the inside of the hopper here. So these four holes are going to line up, and you're going to work your way around doing it the same every time, where the side that's tapered, you want that to sit over the pre-existing hopper sheet that was there.
There we go. That's started.
now that we're back to the beginning of this first self-tapper that we put in, we're going to have to remove just from being our placeholder so we can get our last sheet in. And again, we've got the taper here on the left-hand side of the sheet, so that's going to fit over this one. And then this side, this will be on the outside of our first sheet, since that's where the taper is. So when you're assembling this and you do have problems, or maybe you don't have a second set of hands, what we'd recommend using is a drift pin or something that's a little bit longer, even a screwdriver, where you can get through the first hole, hit that second hole, and cantilever that to get it to line up so you can get a, 2 bolt holes lined up above or below that. But so now we've got the entire hopper at least staged together but still loose. And now what I would recommend is that you come along on the bottom. And again, so we've got our thread former, a self-tapper hole, and then a thread former. We need to go back through and fill in all the self-tappers that we had there, and then you can follow with the 3 remaining holes on the vertical portions of the hopper. And once you have all of them started, go ahead and tighten them up, and you should be done. So this is part 2 of the hog feeder assembly. The first thing that you're going to be putting on is the adjuster tubes, and that includes 5/16 lock nut hardware in one bag and the washers that go with it. On the far end of the adjuster tube, there is a crush portion of the tube with a welded in stud, so you don't have to access the back side of it. That part goes on the bottom side of your feeder. To access that, you have to open up one of the poly doors to see the slotted hole there. So the first thing we're going to do is put all 4 of these on and the top ring piece to assemble it all together. That one right there. And it'll have a welded 1/2-inch nut on there. That's hot dipped. You want to make sure that you can see the slotted holes inside of here, and you're going to stick that in through. And then on the back side, you can lift the door up, and if you don't have help, you can hold it yourself. And you make sure you put a washer first, and then your nylock hardware on there. So it'd be 1 of each of those, 1 washer and 1 nut. And you can leave that loose and you'll continue on to the next one, and there's 4 total to do. So once you have all 4 of these loosely assembled, and make sure that when you're running the nut in, you just barely start engaging the nylock. We'll tighten them up later. You take your adjuster plate with the welded in screw and you place it on all 4 of these. Make sure that when you put it on, that it's bowled up, so that the bowl has alignment coming out towards the edges of the feeder. And then again, you're going to get your nut started with no washer on this side from the same bag of hardware you used to attach the bottom. And after that, you can leave it. Now that you have all of your adjustment rods set in the center of the feeder, the next thing we're going to start doing is putting tank extensions on. For all of these, you're going to be using 1/4 by 5/8 bolts, grade 8, and then flange nuts, 1/4 inch. When you assemble these, they come in halves. 1 set of halves, and the first set we're going to be putting on has a hemmed or rolled edge on the bottom side of it, and that's the same way it's going to be going on your feeder. Later on, there is a set of sheets that have a much larger rolled edge, and it'll also have the Supreme Feeder logo on it. Those are the last and final ring that you put on, so those wait till the end. When you're putting these on one side there is going to be an ovaled out hole, and on the other side there is going to be a round hole. On both situations, you want to make sure that your hem side is always down and that your round hole comes to the outside of it. So the oval is on the inside. That prevents water and moisture from getting into your tank. And in the same way, you're gonna make sure that all of your bolts, when they're put on, go with the head facing out and the nut going on the inside of it. Now when you put these together, we're gonna be doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 holes, leaving the bottom hole open and the top hole open for when we're attaching it to the base and adding the next ring above it. Now when you have your 7 bolts started, all with the heads of the bolts facing out and the nuts facing in, you want to make sure you leave that loosely assembled so that there's a little bit of play here, because these need to flex in and out. Now, when Tyler helps me, we're going to set this on top. Now, just like when you're shingling a house or anything, you want to make sure that what is on top is on the outside of it. So we're going to make sure that this hemmed edge is on the outside of our hopper here, so it'll shed water and not collect into the hopper. So we're going to pick it up. We got to go over that. We're going to set here. Okay, with my top sheet on the outside of the hopper so that it sheds water properly. Starting with 1 bolt on this side and then working my way over and getting a bolt started on the other side, there's still some adjustment we have to make. Using a drift pin, or if you don't have one, a Phillips head screwdriver will also work. You work your way around, and if I'm trying to aim for this hole, for example, I'm going to go 1 more down. I'm going to line my sheet up, and I'm going to use that drift pin to align it. And I'm going to get the bolt started there. And then again, putting your 1/4 inch flange nut on the back side. Get it started, but leave it loose enough that again, everything can shift while you're assembling it. Once you get more bolts started, there's going to be a situation where you're bolting 3 seams together, where your 2 side sheets meet and where it meets a hopper. Now I can see through most of that hole, but since I have both of these holes used up already, I can't put a drift pin in there. Using a 7/16 socket on an impact, as long as the holes are mostly lined up, you aren't going to screw the threads up. But you can get the bolt started in there and it'll thread itself in. After that, you still have to put a nut on the backside. Not in all situations, but if you have an optional step kit, you're going to see 2 dimples on either side of the seam that you just put in. Now the step you're going to put opposite of the way the lid is going to go away from you, so you can step up and shut it. And using those dimples, those are your markers for drilling the hole. You want to make sure you're using a 9/32 bit, and then we're going to be putting 1/4 inch hardware in there. Now the last thing that we want to do with our first ring here is we're going to go around and we're going to tighten every single bolt that is on the bottom seam connecting our hopper. However, do not tighten the 7 bolts on either side of the side sheets. We're still going to leave those loose for when we assemble the next ring on top. Now that you've got your 4 holes drilled in 2 pairs, you can assemble your step on there. Now the step comes with the 4 holes, of course. Then there are also 2 washer pieces. These washer pieces are going to go on the inside of the bin, and they're going to go first, and then you're going to put a nut on the back of it to secure it. Now that we have that ring loosely assembled with the bottom seam tight, we can go on to the top one. What you're going to want to do is make sure that the large rolled hem is towards the top with the Supreme Feeder logo facing you. You're going to want that logo to be on the side that you put the step on. Now before we put this up there or attach the 2 seams, just like the bottom one, there are a few brackets here. This one is a retention clip that goes on the back side opposite of your Supreme Feeder, and it uses these 3 small holes. Specifically with the retention clip, use the top 2. And then on the front side, where the Supreme Feeder is, use this one. This is a swinging clip to hold the lid shut. And all of that is assembled with these nylock screws, or these nylock nuts, excuse me, and then these very small machine screws. Now for this top ring, again, we're going to make sure that the rolled edge is facing upwards, and that's the same way it's going to assemble onto the feeder. The difference here is, again, you have these round holes that need to stay on the outside. And then there are oval holes that need to go on the inside behind the round ones, but there are 2 additional holes at the top. Again, we are going to leave those open for now, and later they're going to be used as your adjuster to open up the bottom gate to let feed out. But we're going to leave them empty for now and just do the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 holes. And again, that bottom one is also going to be left open for when we assemble it onto the existing feeder. Now that you have both edges loosely assembled together with the 7 bolts on each side, nuts on the inside and bolt heads on the out, we're going to put it on top of the rest of the feeder. Now you're going to notice that the seam here that is straddled by your step, that is going to be 90 degrees off of the seam when we assemble this one. So you're going to keep your Supreme feeder logo towards the step, and the seam is 90 degrees off. So with the help of at least one other person, we set this on top loose to start with, making sure that the Supreme feeder logo is again just above the step. And what I would suggest is getting somebody on either end and lifting this until you can see daylight with one of the holes. And you can also assist yourself again with a drift pin or a small Phillips screwdriver. Get one of the bolts started on this side, and then work your way over to the other side and put one more bolt in with a nut to retain it. And then after that, we can work our way around the edge again with the drift pin doing these. Now, on the outside, it's easy enough to get to, but on the inside, you'll likely need a step stool or a small ladder so you can get your hand in to put the nuts on the backside. Now that we have both of the top sheets on, these 2 clips that you receive with are going to go over where the seams are at, and all they do is go over the rolled edge and they clip on, with the formed edge going in to the middle of the bin. Now there is 2 longer bolts, 4 total, 2 on each side, that go with this. And this spreader bar gets sandwiched in between this position and the other seam on the opposite side. And make sure that when you put the spreader bar in, that the channel is facing up so that it's not going to catch grain like it would in this configuration. You want to make sure that it's up and vertical when you put it and install it inside of your bin. Okay, so with the clamp around both sides of the hem so it straddles the seam between the 2 top sheets, you're going to run your 1" by 1/4 bolts in, and then underneath here there's going to be 2 nuts that you'll tighten to hold this in. Now I would suggest assembling one side loose, and then when you go to the other side there may be a slight gap. All you're going to do is push the bin together again, since we've kept everything loose, so that you can get those 2 bolts started with the nuts on the back side. So once you have the 4 bolts through with the nuts assembled so that your feed rod is going through the bin, you're going to grab your crank handle assembly, which is going to come with 2 bags, one of which is going to have 2 1/2" washers, and it's also going to have 2 cotter pins. The first cotter pin you're going to assemble in the top hole by the handle, and then you're going to put the washer underneath it. After that, insert it into the 2 through holes here, and then you're going to take your next washer and you're going to place that on there. And then on your centerpiece, you're going to start turning the handle until it grabs the threads. After that, you're going to thread it in until your top cotter pin hits. And then after that, you're going to have a second hole under here to put your next cotter pin in. Just make sure that you capture both washers on the inside between the 2 cotter pins. Now with both of your cotter pins in and twisted so that they can't come out, one on the top and one on the bottom, retaining the washers to your center channel, now we have to tighten the 4 nylock screws that are on the top of your feed adjuster rods. So you just take your 1/2" wrench and tighten them up. Now with all of your feeder assembly assembled and connected, you should be able to adjust it up and down. Just make sure that you go back down through the feed holes there and snug up all your bolts that we started right at the beginning, now that we have everything assembled so it's all aligned. Afterwards, everything up until this point here and below needs to be tightened, except for this ring here. So starting with your seams on the bottom and working your way up and around, we need to tighten all of the 1/4" hardware. Okay, so now that you have all of the hardware tightened on your bin, we need to start looking at the lid. So a few things to orient yourself. There's a clip on this side with a latch facing in, and then on the far side you're going to see 2 bolt heads, and that is the handle. And on the handle side there should be 2 sets of holes here towards the bottom and another 2 holes here towards the bottom. All of those are going to be used for the hinge to move this. Now there's another 2 set of holes towards the center of the cap, and that is for these brackets. And the brackets mount as shown with the bent form piece going towards the center of your cap. Now that you have your 2 brackets, again with the bent piece going towards the center of the cap, this X brace is what we're going to install next. And this is going to be the hinge that's used to move the lid. But we're going to set this to the side and mount this on the bin first. Now that you've got your lid bracket attached, just to make sure you have the right holes, there's 3 1/4 inch holes on each end, 1, 2, and 3. You should be using the inner 2 on both sides, with the bolt head on top and your nut on the bottom side with the channel. If you have trouble reaching that nut, I would suggest putting your driver on a 6-inch extension and using that to thread the piece in. Okay, once you have your hinge finished, it's going to be sitting inside of the bin here. The 2 extra holes that we talked about earlier, 2 on each side, are going to be on the front towards the handle. You want to make sure that this handle is towards your Supreme feeder sticker, and that's also what this retainment clip is for. So before you go all the way, make sure that this is a little bit loose so that it can spin in and out of the way. So when you're going to finish and put these last 2 clamps on, the 2 stopper clips that we mounted earlier, you can use that to pin the lid up against the side of the bin. And then after that, you can put a bolt in, again with the bolt head on the outside and the nut on the inside. After you have your lid on and the 2 bolts, or 2 pairs of bolts there are tightened, your feeder should be finished. The last thing you want to check is that when you're pulling it up, make sure that it catches on the back side. And then when you pull it down here, you can get your thing across and get your lid shut.